Welcome to the Pod People cast. For the last few weeks, we have been collecting UFO and paranormal encounter stories, and we hope you will enjoy. Our first story was submitted by Jenny. The location of the event was the Midwest, in the later part of the 1960s. It was a warm and sunny day in May. I remember it clearly, because that is the day I witnessed my older brother in extreme distress. With the school day finished, all the children happily departed the grounds. I was in first grade, and I usually had my older brother walk me home. Today he was busy playing football with some of the other boys. I joined the other children walking my direction and made my way home. Not long after I was home, my brother came storming in the door, screaming for help. My grandmother was there, and tried to calm him down. I remember him being very pale, and he was visibly trembling. He could barely draw in enough air to get his sentences out, but he had told us on his walk home that he had noticed a large shadow overhead. He also heard a low humming noise. My brother looked up and saw a large silver disc with white flashing lights hovering over him. He was normally fearless, so he paused to look at it. He had told my grandmother that a laser beam shot out from the disc, but it hit one of the trees on the boulevard. He ran the rest of the way home, for several blocks without looking back. My grandmother told him to calm himself, and that he must have seen a plane or something. I had never seen him like that before, so I went to hug him, and he broke down crying and told me how scared he was. He was trembling uncontrollably. I listened to his encounter several times that night as he told it to various family members. The details were always the same. My big strong brother could not convince anyone of his story. Except me. The next day we walked to school together. As we approached the block of the incident, he grabbed my hand and told me to be ready to run. There was nothing in the sky. Everything looked normal. Except for the tree. The top of the trunk had been split. There was bark on the grass, and on the sidewalk. The smell of charred wood was still in the air. Clearly something had happened. A chill came over me. We discussed it. The weather was calm that day. There were no power lines above. The only thing we could conclude was to take a different route home, and never to walk alone. Nobody ever witnessed what he saw, and the only physical evidence was the tree. Within time he regained his confidence. To this day I remember, and I still watch the sky. When I saw the request for stories, I wanted to tell his story. I hope someone else believes what he witnessed. And better yet, are there any plausible explanations? I also looked on Google Earth, and was able to find the same location. The tree is long gone, but once again, just seeing the location of the encounter sent a chill through me. I hope someone has answers. Our next story is from Kerry. Kerry writes, I believe I was around 12 or 13 years old. We had just moved into a 2-story house from an apartment building. We had an overhang that teenage boys would climb up and knock on our window for fun. I always had an irrational fear that someone was going to come up the overhang and kidnap my twin sister. We shared a room, and I was very protective of her. My bed was up against the wall with the window, so every night, I would stand on the bed and look out the window to keep watch, so that no one would take my sister. One night, I was looking out the window, and there was this giant ball of light, hovering in front of the window. I was frozen and couldn't move. It stayed there for a while, but the weirdest part that has always stuck in my head was that my room was completely dark. A light that size should have lit up my room, and it didn't. It just stayed for a while. I couldn't move the entire time. I couldn't see past it and didn't know what to do. Then, it all of a sudden pulled out and zigzagged up into the sky and was gone. It was so fast, and looked so unnatural. It didn't make sense. I told my parents, and obviously they said I was dreaming, there's no way. But when I was hanging out with my older friend months later, she brought it up. Her backyard connected to my backyard, forming a large triangle. She nervously asked if I had seen something outside my window a couple of months ago. I literally went white. Mostly because it validated what I had seen. She had told me that her sister, and her parents were all in the backyard enjoying a campfire, and they had all seen it. They were terrified, but none of them never brought it up to one another again. Years later, I was listening to a conspiracy podcast that had been describing a group of kids seeing exactly what I had seen. The orb of light, the zooming off in a zigzag pattern into the sky, and they had seen them while they were in bed. The difference was that all of these kids had started to disappear. Most of them had a twin. Our final entry comes from Cheryl Costa, a published author and UFO researcher. Clairvoyance, The Complicated Gift, by Cheryl Costa. That guy at the ticket counter, he is going to die today. There is no question about it, he is glowing with amber light. That means his number is up, and usually there is not a damn thing he, or anybody else can do about it. I used to think it was a good idea to tell them so they could make peace with their families, or their higher power, but that never works out. It just results with me being called a lunatic, a crackpot, or being threatened with getting arrested for harassment, or worse, getting the crap thrashed out of me. Since my earliest recollections, I have both been blessed and cursed with quam ipse sensus. It's Latin for a sense beyond myself. It was this unique awareness of paranormal stuff, and something that led me to a mystical life path of in-depth esoteric study. To use classic labels like psychic, clairvoyant, empathic, or mediumship, etc., gets sticky, and tends to severely limit the understanding of the scope of the ability. Using these common terms has a tendency to color the gift with lots of preconceptions, and most certainly, plenty of alleged expectations. Clairvoyance seems to be genetic, and runs down the maternal side of my family. Do all my relatives who have the capability embrace it? Absolutely not. Most of my cousins buried it and refused to acknowledge what the sight showed them. In most of these cases the gift simply atrophies. A tiny handful of my cousins, and I chose to embrace it at a young age. As a child, the first word I heard used concerning my gift was clairvoyant. Any person who is thought to have such an alleged ability to gain information about an object, person, location, or physical event through extrasensory perception is classically called a clairvoyant, or one who sees clearly. But the sense beyond myself turned out to be bigger than just a simple definition. Over the years, it took many forms, and the information conveyed to me many times was just casually revealing, not really special. At other times, it was incredibly revealing. Still other times, it was downright horrifying, and scared the hell out of me. These things all came to pass, and were as alarming in reality as they were in the dreaming, or visionscape. I make this distinction between dreaming and visionscape because there is a difference. Some precognitive events come during dream time, during the hours of slumber. But precognitive events do manifest during meditation. These days as a practicing mystic, I meditate nearly daily. Of course, this does not mean that I get visions daily. No way. I simply practice quieting my mind's chatter and embracing the quiet. My gift presented itself when I was a toddler, but really began to flow as I began puberty. It was not constant but somewhat episodic at first. I would be someplace, and the gift's effect would manifest, then I might go weeks, or months before having another episode. As an elder adult, it's a pretty constant thing day to day, in one form or another. My spouse of 20 years was warned during our courtship that I walk with one foot on Main Street and one foot in the twilight zone. The common question I get is, do I see ghosts? Most people imagine seeing a ghost as some sort of white transparent apparition. With the sight, they look like you or me. If I drive by a cemetery, I see them sitting on tombstones. I usually wave to acknowledge this presence. It's the polite thing to do. If I tour a supposed haunted house, I might see resident ghosts still hanging out, refusing to move on. If I have privacy, I usually encourage them to move to the light. Many are scared, or waiting for a loved one. Another aspect of the gift is what I call amber light. It's a strange quality of light that appears around people who are about to die. It is sort of a warm glow. Think of it this way, I can be in the garishly fluorescent lit office area with its cold look. I might glance into an office cube and see someone who is bathed in warm amber light, sort of like late-day golden sunlight. That person is going to die within 24 to 48 hours, if not sooner. The first time this happened was when I was in 8th grade. It was Thursday, second period gym class. Coach Fritz has us playing basketball. I was not a terrific player, so I tended to get benched a lot. At one point during the game, I glanced over at Coach Fritz and noticed that she was bathed in a golden light. It was a rainy, overcast day outside, so there was no sunlight to be seen. It was puzzling. The gymnasium was lit with cold, mercury vapor lights. Yet there she was, watching the game intently, illuminated by a warm golden glow. As quickly as it manifested, it faded. Of course, I just thought it was my imagination. The next morning, I came to school, and there was a somber mood in the halls. Teachers were gathered in small groups, whispering. Many of the women teachers were either sobbing, or looked like they had been. When homeroom convened, our homeroom teacher informed us that Coach Fritz had been killed in a tragic auto accident the previous night. She told us a tractor-trailer truck had crossed the highway dividing line and demolished Coach Fritz's car, killing her and her husband. To be honest with you, I didn't think anything of it, besides sadness. Coach Fritz had always been sweet to me, and had encouraged me in gymnastics. Of course, at first, I didn't make the connection with that amber light glow as a marker for imminent death. It would take a few more incidents to make that connection. By the time I was in high school, I had realized what the association was. When I did, I had sort of mixed feelings. On the one hand, I had a sense of awe regarding the unique nature of this etheric indicator. On the other hand, I began to feel guilty about knowing how that person's day was going to play out. I asked my grandfather if I should tell people what I was seeing. He told me, no. People either will think you are crazy, or they will be frightened. He suggested to me that people just don't want to know about their own mortality. In the fall of 1992, I was having a restaurant dinner with a sales manager from a vendor of bulk industrial parts. We just knew each other from our ham radio club. During dinner, we were having a great conversation about amateur radio field days. Then I saw something I had never experienced. I watched amber light literally blossom from the center of his chest and slowly encompass his entire body. This was new, and this rattled me. I excused myself and went to the ladies' room to collect my thoughts. Over the years, I developed a practice of not telling people if I saw amber light around them. Reasons: a couple of times I did, and the persons got all creeped out and began yelling at me, calling me a nutcase. In one situation, the guy got all angry and punched me in the nose and, of course, called me the usual crazy person tirades, as I dealt with the resulting nosebleed. Like Grandpa said, People don't want to know about their impending mortality. But this case was different. Those other people were complete strangers. This guy was a friend of mine, via our shared hobby. Adds to that, I was all out of the closet about being a witch mystic. After all, just about everybody I knew had seen me on Larry King's program the previous year professing to be a witch mystic. When I returned to the table, I gave him a critical look and said to him, "Did you see me on Larry King last year?" He answered in the affirmative. I continued by telling him that I sensed that he was sick, and that he needs to go see his doctor ASAP, like tomorrow morning. He winced and tried to laugh it off, telling me his calendar was packed solid the next day. I gave him a stern look. "I know things about you, and I insist that you drop what you are doing tomorrow and see your doctor, pronto." Again, he tried to toss it off to something he could do next week. Then I told him firmly, "If you do not go see your family doctor tomorrow morning first thing, I will end our friendship, end of the story." He smirked and snickered, telling me that if I felt that strongly about it, he would go see his family doctor. 2 days later, I received a phone call. When I first saw the number come up on caller ID, I thought this was a death notification call. It turned out to be his wife. She told me he had shared my request with her, laughing it off with no intention of going to the doctor. As it turns out, she had seen me on Larry King as well, and took what I said seriously enough to also insist that he go to the doctor first thing in the morning. Then she explained how the doctor listened to his chest, then hooked him up to a cardiac monitor and ran a strip on him. The doctor told his wife to drive him to the hospital immediately. Then she told me that they had done a quadruple bypass on him later that evening, and that he was resting comfortably, and grateful. She thanked me over and over. This gave me the outlook that maybe some amber light events can be circumvented. Perhaps they were not all etched into the stone of a tombstone. Pod People Cast would like to thank the people who wrote in. We realize that opening up about these enigmatic personal stories can be difficult, but this video would not be possible without your contributions. Our story submissions will remain open, and we would love to hear from you about your own UFO sightings and paranormal encounters. Email your stories to us at podpeoplecast22@gmail.com. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a comment and like, and consider subscribing to help the YouTube algorithm recommend us, so that other people can find our channel and join this community.